Okay, this feminist book review is coming out a bit early this month because my family is going on a 2-week trip to Mexico. It's kind of a family reunion thing. My grandfather is not Mexican, but he likes the culture. See you in 2 weeks and enjoy the video. Carmilla by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu is an 1871 vampire novella. Likely inspired by 1847's Varney the Vampire, Carmilla is often speculated to have inspired Bram Stoker's Dracula, which was published in 1897. While its Victorian peers feature male vampire rapist figures threatening young women, Carmilla is set apart for having a female vampire rapist figure threatening a young woman, and the first known depiction of a lesbian vampire. First, there is a framing device in the prologue about a doctor who has found the following account. He would have liked to follow up with its author, but he found that she had unfortunately died sometime previous. The doctor is not mentioned in the rest of the text. It's pretty much the Victorian version of the Blair Witch Project. This totally happened, we just found it, and the author is dead. The protagonist is an 18-year-old girl named Laura, who lives with her father in a remote castle in Austria. When Laura was 6 years old, she was attacked by a vampire woman, Carmilla, who appeared out of nowhere, bit her, and left just as suddenly. Laura was terrified, but her nannies convinced her that it was all a dream. Laura tried to forget about the incident, but it always stuck with her. With the understanding that vampire bites stand for sex, it's a creepy tale of a child molester. In the present, Laura is lonely and looking forward to spending time with a girl, Bertha Reinfeld, whose uncle, General Spielsdorf, is supposed to bring over to meet Laura and her father. However, they receive a mysterious letter from the general saying that Bertha has died and that the general must now leave in search of a monster. It's quite confusing and distressing for them to read. Shortly thereafter, a group of vampires and/or thralls, including a cringe-worthy racial caricature, put on a show, pretending that an apparently French noblewoman must leave her sickly daughter in the care of Laura's father. He accepts, hoping her presence will help Laura's desire for companionship. This daughter is, of course, Carmilla. Whether this timing is coincidence or Carmilla killed Bertha to get at Laura is left unclear, though I personally prefer the conspiracy interpretation. Though the mother has a commanding presence, I like to think that Carmilla is the one in charge, with the one pretending to be her mother actually her servant. Carmilla's main character trait is that she is incredibly powerful and expects to get her way, but pretends to be weak and passive, so her prey drops their guard around her. Laura recognizes Carmilla at once, but Carmilla pretends to also be an average girl who recognizes Laura from some marvelous dream she had as a kid, and Laura accepts the suggestion that they shared some psychic vision. Carmilla pretends that they're destined to be best friends forever, and she really plays up the fantasy of childhood friendship. I'm partial to stories about friendship, and Carmilla knows how to play the part, so it's enjoyable. At the same time, I know she's evil, and it ends up pretty creepy. Carmilla has fun with Laura and terrorizes the countryside. Pretty young girls start to die left and right. The locals start to spread rumors of an oupire, also known as a vampire. There are a series of hints that Carmilla is that vampire. She gets angry and jealous when Laura sings a hymn for a girl rumored to have been killed by a vampire. She gets angry when a jack-of-all-trades offers to file her unsightly pointed teeth. And most overtly, Laura sees a painting depicting a long-dead girl who looks just like Carmilla, captioned, Mircalla, Countess Karnstein. Carmilla explains that she is a descendant of the Karnsteins. I imagine this worked better in the 1800s when vampire fiction was still new and not everyone knew the vampire tropes. As it is now, it just seems bizarre that Laura never once makes the connection, even fleetingly, like, hey, if I didn't know any better, I'd think Carmilla was a vampire. The word lesbian is never used, but it's heavily implied that Carmilla is a lesbian and in love with Laura. Carmilla talks a lot about romance and loving Laura. Carmilla also alludes to wanting to turn Laura into her undead lover to be together for an eternity. Laura has no concept of lesbianism and interprets Carmilla's interest as just an intense friendship, and she speculates that either Carmilla is in love with a boy or that Carmilla wants to help a boy woo Laura. Carmilla denies both and tries to say that she's in love with Laura, but Laura simply cannot understand the concept, and only comes up with Carmilla being sick and acting in frightening ways that resemble infatuation. It's very homophobic and non-consensual. This is not a happy lesbian romance story. Laura is not spared Carmilla's wrath. Carmilla magically enters Laura's room without disturbing the locked door and appears as a Black Panther. The panther aspect is interesting, considering Dracula's transformation into a wolf. It's rather similar to cat people being the feminine counterpart to the wolfman. It seems like men turn into dogs and wolves, and women turn into cats and panthers. The panther scares Laura and then transforms into a humanoid figure that leans in and bites her. This is scary on its own, but it also has sexual connotations that make it essentially a rape scene. The bite is on her breast near her heart, and Carmilla kisses the overall area, so Carmilla basically is kissing and suckling her breast. The not unpleasant sensation of having a vampire touch its lips to you is described as walking against the current in a cold river, which makes sense on its own as an ethereal brush with a paranormal entity, but it could also have an underlying sexual meaning, if you're thinking along those lines. And why wouldn't it be? The author couldn't be explicit in the Victorian culture, but everyone knew what was up.
Did you sleep well, madam? Did you lie comfortably?
John!
No! Damn it, well, you know what I mean.
Yes, John, we know what you mean.
Carmilla does this repeatedly, and Laura loses her health and starts looking half dead herself. In day-to-day life, Carmilla avoids scrutiny by claiming that she has nightmares just like Laura. She pretends to be Laura's friend, and it's super creepy. It's like a textbook abusive relationship. Eventually, help arrives in the form of General Spielsdorf, whose niece was also a victim of Carmilla, or Millarca as she called herself. He tells a similar story, with a mother character helping Carmilla to victimize a young woman. The general hid in his niece's bedroom and attacked Carmilla when she entered as a panther. Carmilla got away, and his niece died. Now the general takes Laura and her father to find the Karnstein tomb to vanquish Carmilla once and for all. Unfortunately, an ancient hero who fought the vampires in the region and did a sloppy job of it hid the tomb. Carmilla shows up and tries to take out the general, but he fights her off with a hatchet and she ends up running away. And then the wholly unnecessary character, Baron Vordenberg, descendant of the ancient hero, shows up to save the day. I really think that this guy and the general should have been one character. It doesn't really work too well to have these two interesting characters brought into the plot, roughly the same time, so close to the ending. The Baron locates the tomb and has Carmilla killed using all of the proper methods. There is no doubt left that she is dead. If that recap sounds rushed to you, it's the same way in the book. Laura tries to get past the Carmilla events, but she is badly traumatized. Her father takes her to England to help her get better, but it doesn't really help. Even over 10 years later, she can't help but imagine that Carmilla is stalking her at night. Given the fact that she died before the doctor found her, we can presume that one of Carmilla's vampire associates hunted her down and killed her. And so concludes Carmilla. It's an old story, and it really shows its age. From a practical standpoint, it's kind of hard to read. Aside from its obsolete and very formal language, the pacing is weird. The plot doesn't fully commit to its characters, with Carmilla and Laura being the only ones really focused on, despite the author seemingly wanting us to like other characters, specifically General Spielsdorf and Baron Vordenberg, who really should have been the same guy. Their story should have been integrated into Laura's story more smoothly. It's like the book slams to a halt to transform into another book about these two guys, and then becomes about Laura again only for the epilogue. It's a mess. At the same time, though, it's effectively creepy, especially during Laura's parts of the book. The biting scenes are very suspenseful, and the idea of someone presenting themselves as your destined BFF, secretly being evil and doing you harm, is pretty disturbing. It is effective horror. While I think that it was really lazy of the author to think that Carmilla's various aliases should be anagrams, it intrigues me as a vampire fan. The general actually asserts that this is a vampire rule, that they can't drop or add sounds in their names, but they can reorder the sounds. It's a strange rule, but it means that Carmilla herself is not actually being stupid and renaming herself that way. That also somewhat justifies the strange direction of the Universal film Son of Dracula, in having Count Dracula call himself Count Alucard. It seems like the laziest alias ever, and it is, but it at least has some precedence in vampire fiction. It still doesn't justify calling the film Son of Dracula when it's the same Dracula calling himself Alucard. Or maybe. It's kind of unclear. From a feminist standpoint, there are two sides to it. It's kind of good that a horror story focuses on a woman being afraid of an evil rapist figure. It legitimizes a young woman as a protagonist, and it accurately depicts abusive dynamics. I'm not sure if that's how it was read back then, but that's something positive we can take away from it now. On the other hand, it's horribly homophobic. The fact that Carmilla has this sexual attraction is supposed to be a part of what makes her scary. In the same way that it's horrifying that an ordinary young woman is actually a vampire who might try to eat you, it's supposed to be horrifying that an ordinary young woman is actually a lesbian who might try to eat you. She is literally a predatory lesbian, literally disguising herself to pursue a woman who should want nothing to do with her. The suggestion that Laura might succumb to Carmilla's advances is also supposed to be horrifying because she's a good saintly girl being pulled away from the pious path to enter sin, seduced to the dark side by an unholy monster. The Carmilla character led to the creation of many other lesbian vampires in vampire fiction, most of them with the same problematic traits. Sometimes she's even referenced in Dracula adaptations as a bride of Dracula, thus erasing her lesbian identity. Fortunately, the Carmilla story doesn't end there. Carmilla is in the public domain. Anyone can do whatever they want with the story and the characters. There have been many faithful adaptations that reproduce its problematic aspects, but there are others written by lesbians to be positive and empowering. A popular one going on today is the Carmilla web series put on YouTube by Verve Girl TV, which rewrites the story to be about a group of lesbian and genderqueer college students dealing with various problems surrounding an evil supernatural college, including the possibility that Laura's roommate Carmilla might in fact be a murderous vampire. I'd really recommend the web series to anyone who wants to see Carmilla as a feminist lesbian narrative, and to anyone who likes Buffy the Vampire Slayer or Veronica Mars. As for the original Carmilla, I'd only recommend it if you're a fan of vampire fiction and want to delve into the original works that built the genre. I know why lesbians find this seduction appealing, but this work is homophobic, and there are better lesbian vampire stories out there.